Hello, everyone. Hello again. I'm glad to greet you at this meeting, which will be dedicated to qualitative sociological data in the public discourse in Ukraine. Since the start of Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is the topic of quantitative data or relations between quantitative and qualitative data in sociology, uh, kind of an eternal topic, which has been discussed always, and different contexts affect our perception of this topic. Today, the media space is overwhelmed with quantitative data and with figures and numbers. They today bring new associations and have meanings that they did not used to have before. And I know also from colleagues and from my own experience that reading the numbers is not the same during the wartime as it used to be during peacetime. I'm glad that we have an opportunity today to listen to 4 Ukrainian experts who all have sociological background. Not all of them work exclusively with quantitative data. I know that some of you, dear colleagues, also work with qualitative data or with mixed methods. And we'll be curious to hear about your relations with counting, calculating. And the idea of this roundtable is to discuss, to hear different opinions on what are new meanings of quantitative data in today's Ukrainian context, what are probable assumptions about sociologists' responsibility, because now I think it is as never present. Sociological data are present as never in the media. We read them almost on a daily basis. And Ukrainian context also is the right one to talk about quantitative data, because unlike some other countries of post-Soviet space, Ukraine has proper quantitative sociology with regular large-scale surveys, which is, for instance, absent in some other countries, where sociology is either controlled by state institutions and thus cannot be trusted, or even openly persecuted, as is the case for some harsher authoritarian regimes. I don't want to take much time, also because our participants, most of them are in Ukraine right now. And this means that unfortunately, because of the Russian invasion, there can be electricity blackout at any moment. So we hope for your understanding, and there can be technical issues, but we hope that there won't be. We have 3 participants who are present here in this meeting now. This is Ivan Verbitsky, Natalia Lomonosova, and Andriy Gorbachik. And there is also a 4th participant who planned to join us, Natalia Glebova, from Melitopol Pedagogical State University. But we received a notification that right now she's experiencing troubles with electricity, but she has recorded a video presentation for us. So in case she won't succeed to join us, we'll still have opportunity to listen to her presentation. So let's go straight to presentations now. We will start with a presentation by Andriy Gorbachik. Andriy Gorbachik is a professor of the Faculty of Sociology at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv. Dear professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am really grateful for the opportunity to express to you my opinion on the topic of the roundtable. I am professor of Kyiv University, Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, Faculty of Sociology, and I teach students methodology of social research and methods of quantitative data analysis. But also I have a long experience to be involved in some quantitative projects in Institute of Sociology, Ukrainian National Academy of Science, in Democratic Initiative Foundation, and Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. I also was involved in exit polls in Ukraine, but maybe the biggest project is for me is European Social Survey. I am national coordinator of European Social Survey in Ukraine since 2004. So I have some experience, and I would like to share my ideas about the topics of this roundtable with you. We are talking about the quantitative data in public discourse, primarily about the data from quantitative representative sociological survey. It must be said that in Ukraine, in general, even before this war, quantitative surveys, polls, or public opinion were treated with respect. And it is not only about the electoral surveys. First of all, we can speak about the rather high level of trust in sociologists and in sociological research. The question about trust in sociologists and sociological research was in many projects, in many studies of the Institute of Sociology, other institutions, and always the level was rather high, even higher than politicians, political party, and so forth. And secondly, everyone remembers that result of the exit poll in the second round of 2004 Ukrainian election become one of the main factors of beginning of Orange Revolution. And the result of this Orange Revolution was a repeat of the second round of voting and the victory of the Democratic candidate Viktor Yushchenko. This is, of course, also an important example of how influence can be polled, and people remember this. And what question and topic have always been in focus of attention of sociologists and sociological survey? Well-being, quality of life, evaluation of activity of politicians, issue of foreign policy, attitude towards the language, attitude towards the joining the European Union and NATO, and other. And of course, the war made changes to the list of relevant questions for quantitative surveys. And what issues are relevant now? This is the life of internal and international migrants, the understanding of what does it mean, the victory now, the victory of our big struggle, economical well-being, psychological well-being. So topics are a little bit, and focus are a little bit changed and moved. Despite the extremely difficult conditions created by this war, many institutions like Rating Group, Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, Razumkov Center, Democratic Initiative Foundation, InfoSapiens, other colleagues, perhaps I have no name it, all of them, they actively conducting survey and publishing the result. The result of quantitative surveys inform First of all, they inform how many people moved, the psychological feeling of people, etc. They also set certain red lines, so-called red lines, like attitude towards the territorial integrity of country, what people think about this, what can be considered as a victory in our big struggle with Russia, and so forth. And also, in some extent, they also predict the future. For example, the attitude toward those who left from country or those who stay on the occupied territory and so forth. And we expect that what will be relevant is not the East-West division or Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking division, but the division into those who were in occupation and who were not in occupation, who was in the front and who was not, who went abroad or who remained in Ukraine, people who moved to another part of Ukraine and the people who didn't do it. This division will be important probably in the future in our survey. And the dynamic changes are very high now. It's difficult to find right now some trends. Everything changes so often that it seems that we are observing some kind of chaos. Yesterday's report are not longer interesting. Everything is very dynamic on the front, and it is dramatically affect people's emotions. And in these changes so quickly that no polls can record these changes. Seminars on methodological features of survey and sociology during the war have been taking place in our country since 2014. It was about the validity and reliability of empirical research data, especially quantitative mass survey, about the frankness of respondents' answer, especially in the city and village near the front line. Many firms now note that war have result the decrease of accuracy of data, a decrease of the quality of sample. There are methodological and even technical difficulties, sampling, even defining the frame of population, transition from face-to-face to telephone survey, work with sensitive questions, and many others. This results in the problematic assessment on how representative are the data. In fact, there is no reliable information about the population. I mean, moving within country, emigration of people abroad, changes of professional structure, etc. Companies have switched to random sampling in phone numbers. But the quality of this approach needs to be studied and also validated. The same can be said about the surveys in networks. Therefore, some sociologists rely on the model of the general population until February 24, on the knowledge about the general population until February 24. And they ask the question where the respondent lived before February 24, and then adjust, I mean, weighted data. In essence, this is the projection of today's public opinion to the structure of population, which was before February 24. It's not good, but it still gives the possibility to standardize the sample for different studies, and it gives the possibility to make some comparison. In general, there is a feeling that the changes recorded by the poll of sociologists are so great that they cannot be explained only by coverage error. I mean, the problem of the sample, lack of information about the structure of population, etc. I mean, changes in such important indicator as attitude to NATO, attitude to European Union, attitude to Russia Federation, trust in political institution, and many others. So in general, data collected now can be trusted. This is the opinion of many or even the majority of Ukrainian researchers. I can say this according to the result of the conference, roundtable, discussion in internet, and also my personal conversation with colleagues. And of course, the result of polls are, and generally quantitative data are actively used by media. Media is always interested in what percentage supports this or that decision, what percentage are dissatisfied with this decision of government. This is important, and people compare their own feeling with the feeling of attitude or attitude of the majority of people in the country. And they know about this feeling of majority from the result of our survey. And it has effect. This is an important factor. Also, it should be mentioned that we have another source of quantitative data that to a certain extent put pressure on government. I mean petitions to the presidents, to the local governments, for example, in Kyiv. According to the law, the government must respond to petitions that have collected some numbers of signatures, at least give an answer for the question posed in this petition. Maybe not positive answer, but the answer must be. So, as a conclusion, I can say that first, conducting surveys, collecting quantitative data actively continue in Ukraine, even during the war. Second, such a difficult condition, I mean war, stress the requirement for the work of sociologists, both those who are in the field and those who set tasks, put the question, develop questionnaires, and analyze the data. Three, despite all the talk about the possible problem with the quality of such a data, these data are an important source of information for researchers now, important sources of information for government now, and for researchers in the future. And in general, the Ukrainian authority, even before the war and now react, it's my opinion, react to such a quantitative data, and they still take them into account when making decision. I mean, at least taking into account in general. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrei, for this interesting and well-structured presentation. I think it's very important that you mentioned trust and sociology that is really present in Ukrainian society. It is also impressive that sociological activity did not stop during the war, and scientific gatherings did not stop, and sociologists are continuing to do their job. Thank you also for mentioning new challenges that sociology is facing now in Ukraine because of the invasion. Those challenges connected to accuracy of the data and to the mass displacement. I think that we will get back to this topic today again. I'm now introducing to you Ivan Verbitsky, who is director of TSADA's think tank, Kyiv, Ukraine. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Yeah,
and actually the idea of the round table I partly owe to Ivan.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for having me. I would present myself as somebody who hold a rather administrative position in think tank. So I'm not like active researcher, but rather someone who are trying to manage different research projects. And also I can identify myself as someone having background in political science, and also as a fan of mixed methods in this quantitative qualitative question. Yeah, I would try to be short and to maybe share some of my thoughts about the topic for further discussion. So first of all, I would agree that quantitative studies are very appreciated and trusted in Ukraine. And I even suggest that quantitative studies are more valued than qualitative in Ukraine. Even the word sociology is used as a synonym to the opinion polls, yeah, and especially, of course, electoral polls. But this idea that sociology is quantitative studies, yeah, is present in public discourse, which is something important about the role of these methods in this country and in public discourse, which I would rather say that from this point of view, there is a need to introduce this public opinion to the qualitative methodology as something that is needed as well. So, like in this time of the war, for me, the very interesting thing that I see now is the importance of some numbers that we have about Ukrainian population and Ukraine and people of Ukraine. Because as I see in some countries, in some political discussions, people trying to examine whether the Russian narratives justifying the invasion and the war itself, whether these narratives had some background, yeah. And from this point of view, people are trying to check some data from last census, for example, about the language of the population, or about the ethnicity of the population, or about whether people would like to join Russia in some eastern or southern regions. And even the idea of referendum as some source of legitimacy, yeah, when people have or do not have, but it is something around the opportunity to answer the simple question, yes or no. And this answer to this question is has very important consequences, yeah, for many different people and for many years, means that this value of quantitative data is very high. And when this so-called referendums were held in occupied regions which are not legitimate or have nothing in common with free will, taking into account that it was like referendums under the guns and there was no procedures and so on. But this whole theater of referendum brings us the question of who actually live in these regions. And I saw many of like Western commentators and researchers and just journalist people trying to find the data about population. And they were using some data from last census, which was 20 years ago, about the language of the population, about the ethnicity, yes. It is a very questionable idea that some country have a right to do something in the territory of other country because of some ethnic minorities there, or to start a war on this basis, which is absolutely unacceptable, of course. but this brings us to the value of this data about the population, and it is actually quantitative data that we have in Ukraine, and we have a big discussion, yeah, about the data we have and how everything was or was not different from the situations that was 20 years ago. But on the other hand, this example also shows us perfectly why we need not only quantitative data, but also other methods to understand the world better, because the simple idea that your mother tongue is Russian in Ukraine today, in last century or in our century, maybe or not maybe, but actually can mean many different things, and may told us more about the Russification policy, for example, and not the attitudes toward Russia or political attitudes or something that can somehow justify the war, invasion, or some policy of the Russian Federation. In this situation, we need to understand deeper and with many different methodologies what it means to have some answers to questions. And here we need some mixed methods and qualitative methodologies to actually do this and to bring to the discussion, to this big political discussion on international and global level, not only numbers about some populations that we have, but also meanings that we have behind these numbers. I would also agree that this instruments that we have, quantitative research that were with us all this time, all this 9 months of the full-scale Russian invasion, plays a big role in society. And the example that I love the most is example about the attitudes toward the internally displaced people inside Ukraine, because like half of the year ago or something like that, there was some tensions or some moods in social media when people were discussing attitudes in hosting communities towards IDPs, whether IDPs are welcomed, do we have some issues with housing, for example, for IDPs, because that was a big problem. And then we had a poll examining the attitudes towards IDPs, and this poll shows us that most of the population do not have some bad attitudes, yeah? So people are welcoming other people. And that was really powerful to show that some cases that are discussing in media and social media are just cases and not the tendency, big tendency, yeah, to work with. I would also say that the great question about the quantitative data in time of the war is like the same question that we have even without the war. It's a question about what is public opinion and whether it exists as some terrorists said, asks us. So to sum up, I would say that of course there are many different challenges and objectives and things to think and to work on in these difficult times. And this is a great time to think out of the box somehow and to ask ourselves whether the work that we are doing is actually correct, and not to repeat the same mistakes that we were doing before, but to rethink what we are doing, to examine whether we are correct or not, and to answer the questions that are similar to us that we ask ourselves time and time again, but to ask again and again and try to find new and more correct answers and better answers. So maybe that will be all from me now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ivan, for sharing your insights, and especially thank you for mentioning this regional dimension of collecting sociological data in Ukraine. I was just thinking that I often imagine or I often visualize my sociological knowledge about Ukraine as a map, where also differences between regions are shown. And I think this is what we really, really often see. Right? The map with differences across regions is one of the most widespread visualizations of Ukraine in the sociological sphere. Thank you also for mentioning this census issue, because now Ukraine is one of the countries that hadn't had a census for quite a long time, for more than 20 years, which means that some data are just not present there, but also census data are supposed to be the most important sociological data available to the public. Yeah, and thank you also for mentioning the fact that behind one figure, there might be different attitudes. And to study them, we actually need some mixed methods. And also, I think another important thing you mentioned is that media visibility of some cases is not necessarily sociologically representative. So some issues that media like to write about are not as frequent as they are present in the media. So these different points, thank you for them. We will now proceed to our next participant. This is Natalia Lomonosova, who is an expert of CEDES think tank. And Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm supposed to start with mentioning my relation to quantitative data. I basically work with both types of data, and I also like mixed methods. While I was studying sociology in the university, I also experienced that quantitative data analysis is valued more. So I was concentrated mostly on that. But when I started to work in the field of policy research, I quickly understood that basically the best picture we can get for advocating those or that proposals for policies is actually to make both and to collect both qualitative and quantitative data, what we mostly do in silos. In my input, I maybe won't talk much about the representative quantitative research or census, because it was already mentioned by my colleagues. And I share most of the points, of course, but I was thinking about making some input on the relation of the data and policies, and whether the existing data is ignored or accepted in policy process and by politicians in general, whether they constitute the reality or reflect it. And I was thinking about another type of data, because when we speak about sociological data, I think it's a question of what is understood in the media by sociological data, and in general in the population. And I would like to mention the surveys made in India DIA is a platform for different digital services in Ukraine, but it's also possible to conduct surveys there. The surveys are not representative, but it's possible to make kind of a voting. I would say voting is a better way to describe what's happening there. But for some reason, official authorities of Ukraine and the media call it surveys. And to give two examples, what kind of questions were asked there since the war started. I think one of the most discussed question was the question on the free possession of the weapons on the purpose of self-defense. The second one, which was widely discussed in the capital, was the question about the future of the Motherland Monument. Because this monument was built in the Soviet time and it has some Soviet emblem on it. And the question was regarding whether we should keep it or get rid of it or replace it with Ukrainian emblem. So the thing is that basically any Ukrainian national which is registered in DIA and have access to internet can participate there, but that's all basically. So there's nothing that we can say about the representativity of this survey. However, basically a lot of Ukrainian politicians can claim that they take those results of such surveys to the account in policy making. And if we talk about this question on the free possession of weapon, the question was that this survey with this question was done in DIA just after the certain law, the certain amendment to the law was introduced in the parliament. So basically, survey happened after the law. And thinking of DIA, I was thinking about the actually voting, the digital voting, which is possible which is possible to do online on the websites of the councils of different cities. For example, voting about renaming the streets. We voted several times about renaming the streets, and the last one was during the war, during the full-scale war, about renaming the streets which have some relation to Russia. And basically, the system is the same. Everyone who lives, let's say, in Kiev and have access to internet can go and vote for the new name of this or that street. So basically, there is no big difference between what's happening in DIA, to my opinion, and what's happening in this digital voting. But the second one is officially described as a mechanism of public participation, of civil engagement. And in both cases, basically, authorities are free to ignore the results and do what they think would be right to do. But then if we look in the media or if we look on the statements of officials, we can see that, let's say, the headline in the media will be 58% of Ukrainians support possession of free weapons for self-defense, not 58% of those users of DIA who participated in this survey. And then the officials will frame the statement the same. So here we came to this question: what is sociological data, what is data, and what kind of data is taken into the account in the political process, and also to the question who has the power to, let's say, to construct reality with the data. Because I was also thinking about the petitions, that petitions is more democratic way, because petitions are the tool for the citizens to implement some kind of voting or to collect votes for some idea. But then the question is whether those petitions influence the social reality via media, for example, on the same level as DIA, for example. And citizens cannot initiate a survey in DIA. Only officials can do that. Maybe it's more like questions and statements, but I think this is important to underline if you speak about data. And another, like the second thing I would like to mention about this data and political process and policy process is again something more practical, and I will talk more about applied social research, about research in the sphere of needs assessment, which became even more important when the war started, since the war started. And I think, I don't know if Ivan will agree with me fully, but from our practice before the war, we can see that if some question is not addressed by the policies, or that some certain social problem is not on the table, usually there is a lack of data about this problem. For example, social housing is not existing as a real policy in Ukraine, and we don't really have a lot of data on the need in social housing. And I think that it will be interesting how the situation will develop in the next months. I don't like to say in the next months of the war, but let's say in the next months, because the need will still remain there. Because without the good quantitative and good qualitative data, we don't really have enough tools to develop a certain policies which would actually address the social reality. But this it's not a dead end, but this problem that when the question is not on the table, there is no data. So there is no data, and that's why we don't have a policy. I think it's interesting how we as a society will solve, because definitely the needs assessment and more applied social research will be something that will be definitely in a huge need in the next years even. Regardless of the events on the battle lines. Yes, that was my ideas. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Natalia. What you were talking about resonates so much to what I'm thinking about recently. So thank you for mentioning the role of digital tools in the formation of our sociological vision of society and public opinion. Indeed, it's an issue now how some voices got more heard than some other voices because of digital tools. And Ukraine is now a space of intensive digitalization. Yeah, so there are many new technologies and options and civic apps and services available to population, actually increasing quality of life, but they also transform that landscape or that visibility of some particular groups of users and non-users of those digital tools. So thank you for mentioning this. We have one more talk now, which is recorded on the video. And this will be by Natalia Glebova from Melitopol Pedagogical State University. And we will now listen to this presentation.
Good day to all. Glory to Ukraine. Community advance, steps to victory. Sociological data is gaining particular importance of the state of affairs in the most problematic places of Ukraine today, in its temporary occupied territories, is much more difficult. Therefore, it's very difficult to comment without excitement on the materials of the study conducted in Melitopol, results of which we present today. For many decides the multinational and multicultural community of our city and region has not faced such challenges. Today's realized supers all the worst scenarios that the national sociological science has had to face in practice so far. The front line was the fight against the enemy today passed throughout our city. The lives of tens and hundreds of thousands of citizens are under threat on the territory of the city community, tens of thousands are internally displaced persons within Ukraine and abroad. The fate of our children, the lives and health of our pensioners, tens of thousands of multiple families are under threat, scattered around the world in anxious expectations of news from their relatives, friends. But the aggressor has not only brutally violated and daring destroyed the foundation of the modern world order, trampled on the elementary human rights to life, work, the well-being of our future generations. The barbaric invasion has also changed the bonds of intellectual brotherhood, measuring Ukrainian communities in its own way in attempt to sow and mighty by all conceivable means and revive interculture interface barriers between citizens in the temporary occupied territories. The full-scale war has made the problem even more pronounced. There is no doubt about the purpose of such war. The occupation process requires a careful attention because they after social relations. In particular, the challenges faced by the community in the temporary occupied territories largely overturn many of our ideas about the state of affairs as they generate many new practices that we use to adapt and overcome this situation in real time. At the same time, the obvious need and expedition of collection information in these conditions is complicated by the inaccessibility of sources, methodological difficulties, in particular organizational issues that affect the quality of the results obtained and direct risk to the lives of interviews and respondents. Analyzing the results of our sociological research within the framework of the international project of the Council of Europe, ethnic communities and community, the key to civic engagement and trust. First of all, we note that given the specifics of the situation, the integrated profile of the main problems, difficulties, and requirements of representatives of ethnic communities remain in the occupied territory is a complex conglomerate of personal and social value factors between which it's not always possible to establish a clear correlation. Analysis of the answers about the recent circumstance of life in the occupation allows us to identify the following reasons and subjective characteristics of the state of affairs that keep many people in the occupied territory as material fear of losing their homes. We build the house ourselves. There will be nowhere to return. The occupiers will move in. Moral inability to leave elderly parents. Prizes do not leave their beliefs, or fear of the unknown, and etc. This actualizes the study of the problem of preventing physiological fatigue, the risk of physiological trauma and emotional insights, and the search for mechanisms to help residents of the occupied territories to overcome physiological crises. The analysis of the main characteristic of the human survival space indicated by the response allow us to state such basic problems of today's occupations as the food problem, lack of medicine, fear of their own lives, the problem of survival, lack of domestic products, lack of money, inability to receive a pension, lack of banking connection with Ukraine. That is why humanitarian support of the community members who remain in the occupation for various reasons is so important. Financial, domestic, and physiological problems of the residents of the temporary occupied territories, despite their poverty and diversity, do not prevent us from identifying the most relevant social trends in the respondents' opinions. Most respondents, in one way or another, touch upon a wide range of issues in the interviews, which is quite understandable given the real situation in the occupied territories. There are various interpretations of the importance of media space factors by respondents, from reducing the importance of media in the condition of occupation, recognition of the influence on the occupiers' media, to the statement of the expeditions of counterancing such influence and the need to break the information blockade. The segment of the survey education and occupation states such problems of the community residents as complete lack of conditions, lack of communication, fear for children, risk of persecution for studying under Ukrainian distance learning programs, or basic technical and information insecurity under occupation. Respondents point to the need for information, educational and awareness raising support, and the organization of green corridors. And sociological science is already able to serve in this matter, to effectively identify the pain points of communities and ethnic communities in the occupied territories, to adjust the mechanism of countering the pressure of the occupiers on the public consciousness, and lays the ground for effective strategies for the restoration of Ukrainian communities. These strategies and practices continue to play a fundamental role in our movement to victory and in the construction of a new social order after the war. We must do everything in our power, and even impossible under other circumstances, so that all those who are under occupation do not lose faith in the effectiveness of our joint efforts. Our joint efforts today are writing memorable pages in the modern history of the city community of Melitopol. Today, as never before, we are still proving to ourselves and the whole world what we are worth as a community. So let's respect because we are worth it. Thank you for your attention.
It is a pity that it's impossible right now to say thank you to Natalia, because this presentation provides a different perspective on how need assessment actually can look like on occupied territories. And of course, we are now dealing with the situation when different parts of Ukraine are to very different extent within reach for sociology. Yeah, so some regions we can study more than some other regions. And of course, the occupation leads to the situation where when new blank points arise or some understudied regions just because they're less available. And there are very specific challenges that Natalia also has managed in her presentation. To me, this also resonated a lot as for a person coming from the east of Ukraine and dealing with this issue as a relative and not as a sociologist. I suggest that we now proceed to questions from the audience. I think I would give a priority to questions from the audience. If there are any, you can either type them into our chat or just sound them, switching on your microphone. If there are no questions from the audience right now, we can also suggest to our participants to react to the statements of each other. Maybe there will be some reactions or some insights. And then we will go back to questions from the audience. Of course, I'm as a curious, engaged listener also have my extra questions, but I would really prefer to keep them as a last priority. So, yeah, everyone is welcome to ask. Ivan, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's a question, but rather some reflection about the petitions which were mentioned by both Andrei and Natalia. And it's interesting how petitions have some renaissance during the war, after the 5 years being it was 5 years ago when the petitions were introduced in Ukraine, or even 7 or 8 years ago. And the first year of petitions was very intense. And then people somehow realized that petition is not the maybe best way to influence politics, because some other methods like mass protests and direct action actually work better. But now, under the martial law, where we have some restrictions of mass gatherings, this mechanism of petition was have its second chance. And on the other hand, I have also reflections on this mechanism that for the successful petition to reach the needed number of signatures, it's not that many people that you need to engage. For example, in city of Kiev, it's 25,000 people, and we had examples when for the same issue, for example, the issue of Kyivo-Pecherska Lavra, which is the main religious site in Kiev, which is occupied by Russian Orthodox Church now, and there are different opinions whether the Russian Orthodox Church should be present there, or maybe Ukrainian Orthodox Church. But it was one of the first examples of petitions when there were actually 2 successful petitions with enough number of signatures collected, but with absolutely different demands. First was about the presence in this site given to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and another petition about keeping it in hands of Russian Orthodox Church. So it is. It also gives us some information about the feeling or thoughts in society, of course, but it is also somehow this idea of representation, yeah. And what is representation? Because we are talking about representation in our studies, yeah, in research, but also representation is something about political participation and representation of different social groups in public life and in policy making. And that's interesting for me. And also, I would like to say a word about the issues that Natalia mentioned about the us like having data as a tool to highlight some issues in society or some problems to be addressed. And here also it is here is where the ethics and methodology and many other things are important, because like even from our experience, there were different attitudes towards research, both quantitative and qualitative. In policy making sphere, because for example, Natalia mentioned social housing, and it's our work to make this issue visible. On the other hand, we have an example of anti-corruption activities, because from the one hand, we have data about the more and more people each year answering that the corruption is an important issue of society and we need to address this issue and so on. But like independent assessments of the level of corruption in Ukraine shows us that actually the level of corruption is lower than 10 years ago, but more and more people think about this issue as important. And here we can have different conclusions from this data, yeah, for policymaking, whether the corruption is higher in Ukraine or not, and how we can use social data and the survey data to interpret and explain the social reality. But we had I have different example, yeah. Digitalization as a reform and big project of Ukrainian government for the last couple of years, and there was a lot of international technical assistance connected to the digitalization, and there were some tenders for the research several years ago asking researchers to provide the data about the successes of the digitalization. So the the research question itself was not about the assessment of the digitalization or the process of digitalization or the reform, and to find like positive or negative conclusions about the process, but to find some confirmation of the bias of the donors who were funding this process. And it's like the one big example, but there are also on the small level of questions that we ask, how we do it, and so on. And in the process of policy making, and with all these examples that we were discussing now, this issue of research ethics and methodology and our internal processes inside research teams. For example, the issue of working conditions of everybody connected to the research process, from interviewers to everybody else, became more and more important because all these small decisions made in this process have influence and are important in the final results that we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Ivan, for sharing these reflections. Still no hands in the audience. And that means that I can take the opportunity and maybe ask then my colleagues a thing that I really don't know about. So this is out of my curiosity. We were mentioning, and you were mentioning today, the communication of the results or communication of sociological data to the decision makers. We are all interested in how sociology actually can impact decision making somehow. Could you tell us about the channels that sociologists and social researchers in Ukraine can use today in order to reach the decision makers? Are this only media and newspapers, and you are expected to publish your results on the internet and in mass media, and then maybe it will become loud, and then maybe decision makers will pay some attention to this data? Or there are some alternatives that you use? Of course, if they are confidential, you are not expected to share these secrets. But if there is some general, more or less widespread practice of reaching out to decision makers in Ukraine, I would be interested to know about it. And I think the audience as well, because I suppose most of our audience is not from Ukraine. Andrei, please, I see your hand. Speak up.
First, about your question. I guess there are two quite different situations. One, if government authority, they finance some surveys, they finance research, they put the question and they want to have the answer. Sometimes they even don't want to publish it, to publish the answer, but they really need the answer just to understand what to do. And second situation is if we have some independent source of resources or something like this, and in this case, only publishing in internet and maybe some events, media. This is a way to disseminate the result. If some result have so-called some discussion or something like this, that's why very often they try to provoke some kind of discussion in media. And also, I would like a little bit to add what Ivan said. And I guess, first, there is no contradiction, opposition between quantitative and qualitative. It's research. It's of course it's long discussion, and we very often propose something for students in this case, but no opposition. It depends of task, it depends of aim, and so I don't think that. And if somebody speaks that we have figures and we don't understand, we need to understand the meaning of figures. This is the main idea of quantitative research, meaning of figures. How to make some decision about your task based on the figures. And second, I think that the idea of the direct democracy, it's also very long discussion, but it's a big simplification. If we don't know something, we just ask people simple question, simple answer, yes, no, and then we know what to do. And as you said, very often we can ask one team ask one question, another team ask another question. First team has 25,000, and second team has 25,000, and what to do? It's a very big simplification, and also it's a simplification of sociologist work, because very often sociologists, they don't ask simple question. They ask something, and sometimes only professional can understand what concepts, what is the meaning of this question, what will be the result of this question. It's not, they need only the reaction of the respondent, the reaction of the informants, the reaction on the, I don't know, on even on a focus group. So it's a big simplification, and I guess that it's a big discussion if we are ready or not ready for direct democracy, even if everybody has a smartphone with DIA in the pocket. Are we ready for direct democracy in this case? It's a big discussion. It's a big discussion. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for sharing your reflection. I think it's really an interesting and important question. Who does the interpretation work? Indeed, when we see the results of sociological data, the way they are interpreted by sociologists can be very different from how they are interpreted by decision makers or by wider audience of mass media as well. So I think this was really important comment. I see our audience is silent, and I, of course, have more questions. At least one that I wanted to ask, because I think we still have some time. The question is, okay, there is a question from Geza Barta, and I'm inviting you to ask it.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
So yeah, I'm Géza from Budapest, and first, I would like to thank you these really interesting presentations, and I also would like to send my respect Ukrainian people who had to suffer from this incomprehensible Russian aggression. And my question is related to the divided Ukraine. Some of the presenter said something about it, but I think it is a quite widespread opinion about or related to Ukrainian, that there are East-West division in the country. And my question is related to what is the impact of the public opinion nowadays during the war about this East-West dichotomy of Ukraine, and why I'm asking it. The reason behind this is that as far as I know, this kind of narrative about the East-West division of Ukraine based on qualitative data, but it is also a kind of imagined and quite popular narratives, maybe among Ukrainian people, I don't know, but other European countries who are interested in and deal with Ukraine, it is also a kind of widespread opinion, and I think it is a kind of simplification and underestimated Ukrainian heterogeneity and regional division of the country. So my question is related to that it is a kind of existing narrative in Ukraine now, or it is a bit different because of the war or other reasons which I don't know. So thank you.
Thank you for this question. Ivan, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just can relate to the question, and also because you mentioned the map as visual representation of quantitative studies, yeah, and data about Ukraine. And actually, I would say that this whole idea about the map of Ukraine with different colors and with some political meanings related to the Western Russian geopolitical central idea came from specific world to the policy world, because there was a famous guy known as Paul Manafort, who was working for the are you hearing me? Because I have not stable internet connection, so I'm not sure that you are hearing me.
Mostly yes, with some interruptions,
Okay.
but I heard you.
Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
what I want to say that there was Paul Manafort, famous for his work for Donald Trump, but he was also working for former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych in 2004 in the election mentioned by Andrei before. And this idea of three parts of Ukraine with different value was his idea of how to divide a country with a political purpose to gain some voters for his candidate. And after it was somehow successful or not, we can discuss it. But he was working for Yanukovych party for almost 10 years. And this was a party working closely with Russia and having the idea of the protection of Russian speakers in east and south of Ukraine as their political agenda, influenced by this American political consultant. So this and of course we can find some data and present our data about the language or the ethnicity on the map. But and it's like legitimate and ethical of usage of this data and these maps in some wider political discussions has not only scientific roots but also some political roots and some purpose of a political party actually and some force behind it. And from that point of view, I think that it is important to understand, like before the discussion about this map. So that was like my important thing to add. I'm not sure that I saw some data about how Ukrainians are feeling about this map and this divide, because there is a widespread idea that this divide is, if it is present, which is also a question, and we have different answers for these questions from different scholars and politicians and so on. And somebody who are agreeing with the divide existence are suggesting that it is moving eastwards. And on the other hand, there is another widespread like also political idea from 2014 that we have like one country, so there was like big campaign, although decentralized campaign, after the start of the Russian war and annexation of Crimea back 8 years ago, with posters around the country with national colors and the slogan that there is one country, and this slogan was in both Russian and Ukrainian with the purpose to just overcome this idea of division. And also it is not that widespread today to have both Ukrainian and Russian in your political campaign about the unification of the country, because today it would be rather Ukrainian language alone because of the Russian war and its how it's going on now, but the idea of the country that was unified by the Russian aggression, and that this all previous divisions are not that important, and that these divisions were somehow not natural, but rather introduced with the influence of Russian Federation. I think this idea is present and discussed, but also maybe my colleagues have more information about the topic.
Thank you, Ivan. I think your answer also brings us back to the question, what is constructed first? Does the representation of data construct reality or vice versa? And if you Google today, you'll see that there are more maps of the war than maps of regional divisions that existed before. I see that both Natalia and Andriy have to answer to this question. Who was the first? I really missed this. Andriy, have you been the first? Probably.
Ladies first.
Please.
Unfortunately, ladies first. But unfortunately, I have the end of electricity at 5 minutes. So probably I will switch off. And I just would like to say only one phrase, that right now, Ukraine became more homogeneous. In the question, as I said in my presentation, is the question of attitude toward the European Union, attitude towards the NATO, and many other important things became more and more homogeneous. And of course, it's also topic for another roundtable, but of course, we need to find another cleavages or another divisions than Russian, Ukrainian speaking and East and West. Ukraine is more complicated, ethnically, religiously, professional structure and social structure and many others. But if we are, that's why I don't like this map. Me privately, I don't like this map. But anyway, it exists, and now on the pressure of this war factor, Ukraine become more homogeneous in many things, more homogeneous. And some people say that this is a way for the real Ukrainian political nation, not ethnical, but political nation. This is a way to establish Ukrainian political nation. We are on the way. And of course, for sociology, it's a challenge just to find what to do. Thank you very much. I am sorry, but probably I will disappear because of electricity.
Thank you for your comment and thank you for your participation, just in case there will be outage. Natalia.
Thank you. I actually wanted to say something similar to what Professor Hrbacek just mentioned, that also from our research that we are doing from the beginning of the war, it's qualitative research, and we are trying to see the influence of the war in different aspects of the life of the people, but also we ask some question about the political participation and ideas about the future of Ukraine. And even in the question about emotions, some people share with us quite their political views, basically. But I would agree with what Professor Hrbacek has said in the very beginning of our discussion, which we see in our research, that new social divisions could arise, and those divisions which are created by the war itself. So basically those people who are in the occupied territories and those who are not, those who are combatants and non-combatants, those who are actively volunteering, participating and everything, and those who are not so active, and so on. And especially what we see from our research is a question of economy. So those people who are heavily affected economically by the war and those who still remain on their feet, let's say. But again, from what we see, we already conducted, now it's a fourth wave of research. It's hard to say whether these divisions will develop into really political cleavages, because it's just a different experience. For some, it's really dramatically different experience, but it doesn't mean that this will basically turn the society apart, because, or as it has been said, in other questions, society tend to unite. So I think it's very interesting what we will be observing in the next years, and whether those new divisions will be politicized, for example, or by some political powers, maybe new parties or old parties. But I also agree with Ivan as Andrei that it wouldn't be a question of language. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalia. It will be really interesting to meet again and talk actually on the same issues sometime in the future, because the context is extremely dynamic and things are changing. And it was mentioned today during presentations that things in Ukraine are changing all the time. And quantitative data are one of important tools to trace these changes, even if not the only one. I would like to thank you for joining this discussion. Thank you to the audience, and first and foremost, thank you to the speakers for agreeing to talk and to share your insights and your reflection. We are now closing this meeting. It is 6 p.m. in Kiev. Have a good evening, take care, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, bye.